Who told you that being a good mother meant putting yourself last? Maybe no one actually said it out loud. Maybe you watched it, you absorbed it, you lived inside it until it felt like there was no other way. I just want to put a picture in your mind and ask you to reflect back about the women who raised you. Maybe it was your mum, your grandmother, your aunties. Maybe it extends further, the women in your family, your community, the world around you. When you think back, what do you see them doing? For me, I see a kitchen. I see beautiful women moving furiously, cooking, cleaning, serving. The table was loaded with food, and it felt like after we ate, like no one had even touched it. I see women who never sat down until everyone else had, who never ate until everyone else had eaten, who gave and gave to their families, to each other, and to anyone who came through the door. They were the eternal givers, and they were always on. And I think observing that year in, year out throughout my young life, I think I grew up believing that this is what love looked like. And it took me a really long time to start asking different questions. Not how do I love like they did, but what did all of that giving, what did it cost them? And what does it cost me? There's a concept in psychology, it's called modeling. It's that we learn from the people we trust. We learn not from what they tell us, but not just what they tell us, but we watch them. We watch them live day in and day out. And what I watched was what so many of us watched. It was sacrifice framed as love. The women in my family are extraordinary. They're the most genuine people that I have known in my life. They showed such great capability, generosity, warmth. We were also deeply connected to each other, and there was such a deep connection to those people around us. And I know that the giving was from the deepest place within them. It was real. And I learnt so many valuable and amazing things from these beautiful women in my life. But there are some things that I'm challenging now as I've gotten older and see where I am in my life and the decisions that I've made. But somewhere in watching it, in absorbing, I also learned something else. I learned that a woman's worth was measured in what she produced for others. That capability, always doing more. That to sit still was somehow lazy. And to receive anything was somehow really uncomfortable. It's taken me a long time to be accepting rather than giving. And that to need something and to actually say it out loud was somewhat embarrassing. Again, it's not that anyone told me these things. This is the story that I created for myself through those observations. And when you see things and the way you interpret them, and they become part of who you are, and it becomes part of your personality, you can start your own cycles, and I certainly have, through the coaching journey, I started really challenging some of my own beliefs. And it wasn't until I started the coaching journey that I started to understand the language around it. And what I was watching, and what many of us grew up with watching, is what psychologists call overfunctioning. And it's shadow, the thing it quietly creates in people around it, and that is underfunctioning. When one person does everything and anticipates everything, does everything, they leave very little room for anyone else to grow. And that is to grow, to struggle, to figure out things for themselves. I've started calling it within myself, and jokingly, I guess, the curse of capability. Because the very thing that looks like strength, that relentless competence, that always having to have an answer, that inability to let things be imperfect or unresolved, can quietly become something else. And it's something that I've been examining within myself, and it's something that I notice in the women that I work with. If I think about my own mum, the gorgeous mum who has given me everything, I think one of the hardest things as I've become a mother is getting the questions, not just from her, from other people as well, about your choices as a mum, and you share stories, and sometimes you get things back that make you feel, was that the right decision? One of the things that I'll share with you that comes up somewhat often is one of my sons is he needs to take the bus home sometimes. I take him to school, but sometimes he just needs to take the bus home. And my mum will ask curiously, so how's he getting home? And I'll say, he'll take the bus. And she's like, oh, no, I'll go and get him. And it's taken some work to insist that he takes public transport because it's what he needs so that he can start taking care of himself, because he's admitted that he finds it a bit overwhelming to take the bus. And I feel at 14, 15, that it's time to build some level of autonomy. But in doing that, I have faced judgment about that I'm not doing enough. And that whole idea about rescuing him and the discomfort that it brings up, not for me, but for my mum, which has taken some massaging to get her to be okay with it, because her version is to overfunction, to overcompensate. And I know that's very strong in me too. The other part of me that I know has overfunctioned for a long time has been just keeping the house going. I work full time, and I was a single mum for a little while, remarried, but still there's a lot to do: the cooking, the cleaning, the shopping, the rescuing from different situations, washing clothes, just having things prepared. And I often say that I'm the hardest working person in this household, and I think for a long time I really didn't question it. It's what I knew. It was what was done for me. And I guess in many ways that's what love looked like. That as a mum, I'm here to support. And yes, it is. I do take that very seriously. But at the same time, What am I actually doing? And it wasn't until I named it, until I could actually see the pattern, that I started making changes. And one of the changes that I've made is that the kids now do their own laundry. I help them. It's not that I don't help them, but I do give them far more responsibility now than I gave them credit for before. And it might just be a very small thing, but for me, it's been a big thing, because even now, I'm fighting my own instinct to just do it for them. See a full basket, and I'm like, no, they'll be able to do it. They know how to do it. And I just encourage gently that it's time. And slowly, we're getting there. They're building that autonomy, and they're building that level of responsibility. And one of the things that I'm giving back to them, which perhaps I was unknowingly stealing, is their ability to build their strength of autonomy and competence and self-trust. Here's where the research gets interesting. There's a foundational theory in psychology. It's called self-determination theory, something that I go back to often because it is applicable in all parts of our lives. And this is the theory that was developed by Deci and Ryan. And it tells us that human beings have 3 core psychological needs that must be met in order for us to truly thrive. And they are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And autonomy, what does it look like? It looks like that you have a sense of that you're the author of your own life, that you have choices that are genuinely yours. And competence, where you sense that I can do things, that I am capable, that the struggle leads to growth. And the relatedness part is about connection. It's about where you have a sense of belonging, how are you connected to others, how are you connected to self as well. And when we look at that in an over-functioning model, we see that we may be building those parts within ourselves, but the under-functioning part is, how are we stealing that from the people around us? And sometimes we can disguise that as generosity and care and love. But I ask you, are there times where there needs to be a pause to recognize, is this me over-functioning, or is this a moment where I really do need to take the lead, to model? And at times there's a fine line there. So perhaps in your own family, it's not just in your family, it's in your workplace, it's around all the people that are part of your life. And when we think about our kids, when do we potentially do everything for them? When we rescue, anticipate, fix, manage, we may be undermining 1, 2, or even 3 of those pillars. And when we do that, we are quietly communicating that you don't need to develop competence because I'll be competent for you. You don't need autonomy because I will make the decisions for you. And we're doing it from a genuine place of love. And I guess that's the heartbreaking part of it, which is it through the love that we have for them, the deep core love that we have for our children, for those around us, are we essentially building them up and building ourselves up at the same time? And there's some really compelling research that you may recognize and how this may resonate for you around why the generation of parents that we currently see tend to become more over-involved than potentially what we experienced when we were young. And there is a psychologist called Mary Main, and her work on adult attachment patterns found that parents who experience inconsistent or emotionally unavailable parenting in their own childhoods are more likely to become hypervigilant, over-present parents who are unconsciously trying to repair their own experience from their own childhood. That we're trying to fill a gap that we felt when we were young. Perhaps we felt underparented in some ways, perhaps not fully seen, not fully supported, and we swore we would do it differently. And perhaps in doing it differently, in overcorrecting, we're creating a new problem. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, and he highlights this, which is that potentially the overprotection of children and the removal of risk, and the management of discomfort and the constant rescues is directly correlated with the reduced resilience, the increased anxiety, and the generation of young people who struggle to trust themselves. The love is real, absolutely, deeply, but perhaps the impact of that is the opposite of the intention. I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier, the curse of capability, because I think this is something that doesn't get talked about enough, especially for women who have built their identity around being the person who gets things done. And I've had coaching around this myself, and one of the questions that landed most heavily, and that actually sounds simple until you actually try to answer it honestly, and that is, what does your capability give you? And what does it produce? What does it achieve for everyone around you? What does it give you? And I've sat with that for a while, and this is what I've come up with for myself, is that it gives me purpose. I'm doing, I'm contributing, I'm solving, I feel useful. I guess I feel like I matter. Like my presence in the room means something, gives me a sense of competence, that I feel I can handle anything, that I've got this, there's something deeply satisfying about it, something that feels almost necessary. Like without it, I'm not quite who I am. It gives me self-reliance. I don't have to wait for anyone. I don't have to depend on anyone. I've built something in myself that I can count on. And after a childhood where I felt that I largely had to champion myself, where I wasn't waiting for someone to validate me, I think that self-reliance has been, in some ways, a great asset. But I think that potentially that I've been overcompensating. And I'm still sitting with that one. But here's what I've learnt, and what I've watched again and again in the women I work with. The moment you can name something, the moment that you can actually see the fear underneath the behaviour, it loses a little bit of its power. It stops running the show from the shadows. You go from being driven by something unconscious to being in a conscious relationship with it. And that is where everything begins to shift. Because the questions that I now ask myself before I jump in, before I rescue, before I take over, are simple ones. So I ask questions like, what might not happen for someone else? What am I doing this for? Is it for them or is this for me? I don't always get a comfortable answer when I ask those questions, but I get an honest one. And the honesty is where the growth actually lives. So lastly, as I finish up, I just wanted to talk a bit about sacrifice. That chronic identity erasing, need suppressing kind, which I believe is not self-love. It may be confronting, it might even feel wrong to hear it, but I'd love for you to consider this. When you sacrifice yourself completely, when you make yourself last, always and without question, you are not just depleting yourself. You are modeling depletion as the norm, and your children are watching you. They are learning what a woman's life looks like, what it means to be a mother, whether their own needs will ever be allowed to matter. The most loving thing and the most genuinely generous thing we can offer the people around us is a version of ourselves that is whole, present, nourished, honest about what they need. Not a martyr, not a role, but a person. Since I named the pattern in myself, since I started asking what happens if I do this, what might not happen, am I robbing them of building their own autonomy and resilience? Things shifted. Not perfectly, definitely not overnight, but it's me fighting my instincts daily and being cognizant of it. And I've learnt something else that's really important, that self-compassion is not self-indulgence, that slowing down is not failure, letting my kids struggle is not cruelty, and wanting a life that feels genuinely like mine alongside my family, not in spite of them, is not selfish. And it's possibly the bravest thing I've done. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much. If something in this video has landed, I'd love to offer you one more question to take away with you. Who are you without all the doing? Not as a mother, not as a partner, not as a professional, or the person who holds everything together. Just you. If that question feels impossible to answer right now, that's why I invite you wholeheartedly to my She Thrives community. The link is below. And this is where we have the thoughtful, provocative, supportive, courageous, compassionate conversations amongst women who are going through this amazing journey of life, loving dearly and looking for that moment where you go, yeah, this is it. This is what it's all about. Look forward to seeing you again. Sending you so much warmth.